If you want to change your life, start by making your bed. Because greatness doesn't begin with applause. It begins in the darkness, before the sun rises, with cold water, sharp corners, and quiet resolve. This is not just a Navy SEALs rulebook. It's a battle plan for life. From the man who led elite warriors into the most dangerous missions on Earth comes the most unexpected lesson of all. Change the world by starting small. Welcome to Make Your Bed, only on Thinknova. The morning began long before the sun rose, with the silence of the sleeping world shattered by the shrill whistle echoing through the naval training barracks. Cadets leapt from their bunks in synchronized motion, not because they were ready, but because they had to be. This was the first lesson in discipline, a virtue not born of motivation but forged through habit. Among them stood a young man named McRaven, a determined soul standing at the threshold of an experience that would shape his life forever. Before the chaos of the day could consume them, before the freezing surf and punishing physical drills, before the pain and the pressure, they had to make their beds. It seemed like a simple task, almost laughably so. Stretch the sheets tight, align the blanket with precision, smooth out the corners, and center the pillow just so. But this act was no triviality. It was a ritual, a habit, a declaration. For in the tiny details of this act was hidden the seed of a larger truth, that if one could not get the little things right, the big things would always remain out of reach. McRaven learned early that life was not going to be easy, and SEAL training ensured that illusions shattered quickly. Hell Week, as they called it, was a test of will more than muscle. The icy water seeped into their bones, muscles screamed from endless physical punishment, and sleep became a forgotten luxury. But every morning began the same way, with the bed made to perfection. In those quiet moments before the madness, there was order, there was control, there was a win. The instructors were relentless, and they had to be. It was their duty to break down the men who would wear the trident, not to belittle them, but to rebuild them stronger. McRaven watched as peers who were physically superior crumbled under pressure. It was not size, strength, or speed that separated those who endured. It was resolve, the refusal to surrender, the choice to stand up when the body screamed to fall. One of the earliest lessons McRaven carried with him was the value of hope. During one of the most brutal drills, the brass bell hung in plain view. Ringing that bell meant it was over. No more suffering, no more pushing, just rest. Yet every time he looked at it, he saw not escape, but defeat. He vowed never to touch it. He vowed that as long as he could move, he would continue. During one grueling night of training, a team of cadets was ordered into the freezing Pacific surf. The cold bit into their skin, the wind whipped across their faces, and their teeth chattered uncontrollably. The instructors told them they could escape the misery if only a few would quit. If just a handful rang the bell, the rest could go warm and dry, but none did. They huddled closer together, singing loud, their voices trembling but defiant. That night they didn't just survive, they won. McRaven saw that the strength of individuals could never surpass the power of a team. In the SEALs, a team was not a group but a brotherhood. They moved in sync, thought in sync, suffered together, succeeded together. When one fell, the others carried him. When one succeeded, it was the group's triumph. Ego had no place in a boat crew. The mission was everything, and the team was sacred. Another hard truth that life and training hammered home was this: the world is not fair. One day, the instructors lined up a group of cadets and, with no explanation, assigned them the dreaded sugar cookie punishment. Without being told why, McRaven had to jump into the ocean, get soaking wet, then roll in the sand until his entire body was covered. He would spend the rest of the day itchy, chafing, and cold. He hadn't failed any drill, hadn't broken any rule, but it didn't matter. Life wasn't fair, and he was not owed an explanation.
This lesson bled into every experience thereafter. People would betray, life would disappoint, circumstances would overwhelm, but complaining did nothing. The only way forward was to accept the injustice and move on. What mattered wasn't what happened, but how one responded to it. At one point in training, McRaven was paired with a fellow cadet who had lost a leg and walked with a prosthetic. The man was fierce, never using his injury as an excuse. Instead, he pushed harder than anyone else. His grit was a testament to human willpower. He didn't want pity. He wanted purpose. Watching him fight through obstacle courses, dive into freezing waters, and carry boats on his shoulders without ever asking for special treatment, McRaven realized that heroism isn't about medals, it's about resilience. Fear was another constant companion. Not just fear of failure or pain, but fear of the unknown. The deep ocean dives into pitch-black waters where anything could be lurking. The tension of real-world missions where life hung by a thread. These moments required not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Courage, McRaven understood, wasn't about being fearless. It was about proceeding despite fear. Throughout his service, he would encounter challenges far beyond the training grounds. From war zones to global missions, from diplomatic negotiations to moments where life and death danced on a razor's edge, the foundation laid in those early mornings never wavered. The bed, made with precision each day, was more than a task. It was a reminder that control begins with the smallest action, that victory is built from routine, that greatness hides in discipline. There were missions where everything went wrong. Plans fell apart, weather changed, intelligence was flawed. But even then, preparation mattered, composure mattered, and in the darkest moments, it was the habits formed in discomfort that saved lives. When the body wanted to quit and the mind began to doubt, the simple act of having made the bed stood as proof that one thing had been conquered that day. Leadership, McRaven saw, was not about rank or orders. It was about example. In the field, respect wasn't commanded, it was earned. Leaders ate last. They took responsibility when things failed and gave credit when things succeeded. They showed up early and left late. They knew every man by name and watched every back. True leadership was quiet, consistent, and compassionate. On one mission in hostile territory, a SEAL team was tasked with rescuing a hostage. The conditions were volatile, and time was not on their side. The mission required precision, speed, and unity. The team moved like shadows, coordinating silently, each step rehearsed, each breath controlled. The operation was a success, and the hostage returned safely. But McRaven knew the true success had been built months before, during the harsh drills, the morning routines, the unforgiving expectations. In that rescue, years of discipline came to bear fruit. As his career progressed, McRaven carried these lessons into every room he entered. Whether briefing top officials or comforting grieving families, whether facing bureaucratic hurdles or hostile enemies, he grounded himself in the values learned in that first week of training. The small things mattered. The details mattered. And above all, character mattered. When faced with chaos, he looked for order. When the world seemed overwhelming, he focused on the task at hand. When darkness threatened, he remembered the power of hope. Hope, he realized, was a weapon as powerful as any rifle. In war-torn villages, hope kept people moving. In hospitals, it kept soldiers fighting. In his own heart, it kept him grounded. Sometimes all it took to find that hope was a small win, and often that win came at the very start of the day, with a bed, perfectly made. In the heart of training, McRaven began to understand the power of perseverance. There were days when muscles ached beyond measure, when blisters turned to open wounds, when the cold wind mocked every breath. Yet, the routine never changed. The alarm always came too early. The sand always found its way into every crevice, and the ocean, vast and merciless, welcomed them with chilling indifference. But he rose, again and again, because quitting was never an option. The memory of long runs with sandbags over shoulders never left him. Each step felt like defiance. The instructors watched with steely eyes, looking for weakness. But it wasn't just a physical trial. It was spiritual. Could one remain mentally composed when the body had broken down? Could one find calm in the storm? There was one drill that remained etched in McRaven's mind: the obstacle course. It was long, treacherous, and precise. Every mistake cost precious seconds. But the obstacle that loomed largest was the 10-foot wall. Many tried and failed. Some hesitated. Others overthought. But the fastest way over was not by being cautious. It was by taking a leap of faith. It taught McRaven that sometimes, to succeed, one must take risks. Calculated, yes, but bold nonetheless. He recalled the time he fell from the rope swing and landed awkwardly in the mud. His pride was bruised more than his body. But instead of wallowing in shame, he got up, wiped the dirt from his face, and tried again. Failure, he learned, was never the end. It was a stepping stone. Each mistake brought clarity. Each stumble taught humility. SEAL training was not just about building warriors. It was about shaping character. It was about pushing men past the edge of endurance and watching them rebuild themselves with stronger will. Instructors often paired the biggest cadet with the smallest. It was no accident. The small one had to grow in confidence. The large one had to learn compassion. Teamwork wasn't optional. It was survival. During a night swim, McRaven and his partner were tasked with navigating through shark-infested waters. Fear lurked beneath every ripple. The instructors had warned them about the dangers, but they had also given one command: never back down from a shark. If one approaches, stand your ground. Punch it in the snout if needed, but never swim away. That night, McRaven learned that confronting fear was the only way to move through it. Years later, standing at the edge of a war zone, the same principle applied. Whether in the ocean or in enemy territory, fear only grew when you turned your back to it. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was moving forward in its presence. In another part of training, McRaven's group was punished for the failings of a few. They were ordered to do countless sets of push-ups and flutter kicks in the sand. They could have pointed fingers, blamed the weak links, but they didn't. Instead, they united, carried each other through the pain. They realized then that teams rise or fall together. Individual success was meaningless if the team was broken. This lesson followed McRaven far beyond the training grounds. As he rose through the ranks, he saw leaders who embraced the team and others who exalted themselves. The former created bonds of trust. The latter sowed division. Leadership was about serving, not ruling. About lifting others, not standing above them. There was a young recruit named Kyle in McRaven's unit, a soft-spoken man from a quiet town, unassuming and humble. During one mission simulation, Kyle's team was separated under fire. Amidst chaos, smoke, and confusion, Kyle crawled through enemy fire to retrieve a wounded teammate. He risked everything, not for glory, but because no man gets left behind. That moment defined him, and McRaven never forgot it. Time after time, the power of resilience echoed through the actions of ordinary men doing extraordinary things. Some had grown up poor, others had faced discrimination or personal tragedy. But in training, those backgrounds didn't matter. What mattered was grit. The unrelenting decision to keep going when every fiber begged them to stop. Back on the beach, another tradition stood out: the uniform inspection. Each cadet had to appear with boots shined, belt buckled, and cap spotless. No dust, no wrinkles. If anything was off, they were punished. Not because appearance mattered in combat, but because attention to detail did. If you can't keep your gear in order, how can you manage a mission? Excellence, McRaven learned, began in the smallest of things. There was also the matter of attitude. Instructors never tolerated self-pity. One of them once said, "The moment you feel sorry for yourself is the moment you lose." That line stayed with McRaven. Life was filled with setbacks. Missions failed, friends were lost, promotions delayed, but wallowing achieved nothing. Action did. There was a time during deployment when McRaven lost a friend, an officer who had served beside him for years. The loss was crushing, and grief weighed heavily. But even in sorrow, the mission called. He honored his friend not with tears alone, but by continuing the work they had started together. Years after leaving the brutal routine of SEAL training, McRaven found himself addressing large rooms filled with civilians. He realized that the principles he had learned in mud and surf had universal application. Making your bed each morning was not just for soldiers, it was for everyone who wanted to start their day with purpose. That single action, done well, created momentum. It gave a sense of pride. And on the hardest days, it reminded people they still had control over something. He spoke often about the need to lift others. If you want to change the world, he would say, start by helping one person. Not through grand gestures, but simple acts. A word of encouragement, a shared burden, a small kindness. The world didn't need more critics. It needed more doers. On one mission in Southeast Asia, his team had worked closely with local villagers. Many lived in poverty, yet they shared what little they had. Their resilience in the face of hardship humbled McRaven. One elder gave him a handmade necklace as a token of gratitude. It wasn't valuable by material standards, but McRaven kept it for years. It reminded him that strength comes in many forms. There was also the lesson of being your very best in your darkest moments. When the stakes were highest and failure was not an option, one had to dig deeper than ever before. It wasn't about adrenaline. It was about preparation, habit, mental fortitude, and belief. Late one night during a critical mission, radio contact was lost and all eyes turned to McRaven. The pressure was suffocating. Every decision held consequences. But instead of panicking, he fell back on the principles he had lived by for years. Think clearly, trust the team, do your duty, and act. The mission was salvaged. But more than that, a lesson was solidified. Leaders are made in moments of crisis.
As he reflected on the trajectory of his life, from young cadet to admiral, McRaven saw how each small lesson had been a building block. Making the bed, enduring pain, helping others, confronting fear, embracing failure, leading with humility, staying focused. These were not just military ideals, they were life principles. He never forgot the ceremony where he had received the Seal Trident. It was a heavy metal insignia, cool to the touch but burning with meaning. It represented not just skill or bravery, but sacrifice, discipline, and honor. He wore it not for himself, but for every man who had earned it beside him, and for those who had given their lives in service. Years later, standing before a graduating class of students, McRaven told them that the world could be cruel and chaotic, that no one was immune from hardship, but each of them had the power to start their day with purpose, with something as small, yet meaningful, as making their bed. It wasn't about the sheets or the corners. It was about sending a message to themselves and the world that they were ready. The wisdom gained through hardship stayed with McRaven not only in war zones but in the quiet corners of life where the choices made didn't involve life or death, but still defined who he was. After all the years of rising before dawn, wading through freezing waters, and carrying boats across shoulders that burned with exhaustion, it was the small acts that he found most meaningful. He remembered visiting military hospitals where soldiers lay with missing limbs, burn scars, or bullet wounds. They greeted visitors with smiles, often more concerned with the well-being of others than their own pain. It was in those hospital beds, not just on the battlefield, that McRaven saw the rawest form of bravery. Men and women who could have surrendered to despair chose instead to live with purpose. They didn't complain, they didn't quit, they made their beds. There was one young Marine whose name was Tyler. He had lost both legs to an IED. Yet, when McRaven entered his hospital room, Tyler saluted. He spoke of wanting to rejoin his unit. He asked how he could help from where he was. That spirit, the refusal to let circumstance dictate identity, was the embodiment of everything McRaven believed. The body may be broken, but the soul remained unshaken. Back in his earlier days, when training had ended and active duty began, McRaven found that the habits forged in discomfort became his foundation. Whether it was drafting mission plans, coordinating intelligence, or leading SEAL teams into enemy territory, he trusted those habits more than inspiration. Habits didn't vanish when times got hard. They anchored him. It wasn't always about combat. Some of the hardest battles were administrative or diplomatic. Navigating the bureaucratic layers of the Pentagon, presenting strategies to civilian leadership, managing interagency operations, all of it required clarity, patience, and emotional control. And just like during Hell Week, everything could unravel quickly if not handled with precision, so he stuck to the same process. Wake early, make the bed, prepare thoroughly, control the controllable. One of the principles he often repeated was that failure can make you stronger, if you let it. In his career, not every operation was a success. There were missions where intelligence was flawed, equipment failed, or luck ran out. After one particularly difficult mission that led to casualties, McRaven spent nights replaying every decision. He questioned his judgment, reevaluated his choices. But what mattered was not avoiding the failure. It was learning from it, owning it, and never letting it paralyze future action. He also learned how often appearances can deceive. Some of the toughest operators he ever met didn't look like they belonged on a recruiting poster. They weren't always tall, muscular, or loud. Sometimes they were lean, quiet, and soft-spoken. But when chaos came, they didn't flinch. One of them, a man named Hector, had once worked as a teacher before joining the SEALs. He lacked the stereotypical bravado, but in combat, he was unshakable.
McRaven reflected on the concept of willpower. Willpower wasn't a finite resource as many believed. It was built like a muscle. The more it was exercised, the stronger it became. Each decision to show up on time, to push through pain, to carry a teammate, or to finish a mission added to it. Over time, that discipline became second nature. He recalled one moment in South America where he had been stationed on a training advisory mission. The conditions were harsh, high altitude, low supplies, political uncertainty. One evening, as his team sat in silence around a small campfire, he noticed how exhausted they were, but nobody complained. They cleaned their gear, they checked on each other, they joked quietly. That's when McRaven understood that excellence was not about energy levels, it was about mindset. There were nights when sleep was cut short, meals missed, or delays pushed tempers to the edge. But the rule remained: be your best, especially when it's hardest. If you wait for ideal conditions to perform well, you'll rarely rise. The great ones showed up even when everything hurt, when no one was watching, when rewards weren't guaranteed. During the planning of a high-stakes mission, McRaven found himself in a room filled with conflicting opinions. Time was tight. The operation required coordination between multiple countries, intelligence agencies, and local allies. He leaned not on volume, but on clarity. He asked calm questions, laid out concise priorities, and earned consensus not through power, but through credibility. That meeting, though far from the battlefield, felt like another SEAL test: get it right or risk everything. He kept returning to the lesson of resilience in the face of unfairness. One of the most frustrating things he witnessed was when good people suffered despite doing everything right. He saw promising soldiers rejected from programs for minor medical conditions. He watched families lose loved ones too soon. He observed how life, indifferent to effort, often handed pain to the undeserving. But he also saw those people get up, rebuild, and serve anyway. There was a janitor who worked at a base McRaven often visited. Most people passed him without acknowledgement. But McRaven noticed how the man always whistled, always polished every floor with care, always greeted everyone. One day, he asked the man why he took such pride in his work. The janitor simply said, "Because it matters." That quiet dignity, that sense of contribution, no matter the title, moved McRaven more than many medals. Later in his career, when he took leadership roles in academia and policy, McRaven applied the same principles. In universities, he told students the truth, that no degree or title would matter if they lacked character, that success without values was empty, that if they wanted to change the world, they didn't need to start big. They just needed to start. One student once asked him how to find purpose. McRaven told her that purpose wasn't always discovered in a flash of insight. Sometimes, it was built slowly through daily commitments, through doing the right thing when no one is watching, through failing, adjusting, and continuing, through serving others, not oneself. He also reminded his audience that changing the world was not a fantasy. It just required persistence. One person, helping another, could start a ripple. A single life saved. A child inspired. A door opened. That was enough to begin. History, he often said, was shaped by individuals who chose to act when it was easier to stay silent. On reflection, McRaven saw that his journey, from his first bedmaking in basic underwater demolition training to standing at podiums around the world, had not been a result of genius or luck. It had been the product of tenacity, daily habits, the support of teams, and a deep-seated belief in doing what was right. The discipline he carried into every area of life was not rigidness. It was freedom. It freed him from chaos, from indecision, from excuses. It gave his life structure, and from that structure, strength. He remembered how some nights during training, when the stars hung over the silent Pacific and the waves were mercifully calm, he would stare up and realize how small he was in the vastness of the world. Yet, he felt grounded, not by grand achievements, but by the knowledge that he had done his duty that day. It always began the same way, with a made bed. The morning ritual had become more than just a habit. For McRaven, it was an act of affirmation, a way to declare order over disorder, discipline over chaos, and strength over surrender. Even after leaving the battlefield, that habit followed him home. Each morning, regardless of the location, regardless of the schedule, the bed was made. Sharp corners, tight sheets, fluffed pillow. That small act said, "Today will matter." Looking back on the decades of service, the lessons gathered were never taught in classrooms. They were learned through endurance, sweat, silence, and pain. In war zones and barracks, on submarines and aircraft carriers, in deserts and freezing oceans, each location left its imprint on his character. And yet, the teachings always returned to the simple truths. When McRaven addressed new cadets or public audiences, he didn't speak in lofty terms or abstract ideas. He told stories of comrades, failures, victories, and mistakes. He told of a time when he was almost pulled from the program for a back injury, only to recover with even greater resolve. He told of young soldiers who showed unimaginable courage, not for medals, but for each other. He told of small wins and how they lead to large victories. One such win came when a cadet named James failed 3 consecutive swims during training. Most assumed he wouldn't make it, but James kept showing up. Day after day, cold and shivering, he dived back into the water. He never gave up. On his final chance, he passed. Just barely. But he passed. And later, in real combat, James led his team through a river under enemy fire. His calm demeanor, a direct result of the suffering he had already mastered. That story reminded McRaven of a vital lesson. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. In every mission briefing, McRaven emphasized preparedness. He believed that calm under pressure came from confidence, and confidence came from preparation. In one particular mission overseas, things went sideways. The terrain changed, communications failed, weather turned. But because the team had rehearsed dozens of contingencies, they adjusted. They moved like water around obstacles. They got out safely because they had trained for what might go wrong. This philosophy extended to life outside the uniform. Relationships, careers, and health all needed attention. Discipline in one area strengthened others. A person who could wake early, face discomfort, and follow through on a promise was a person capable of facing larger adversities. And then there was the idea of never going it alone. In SEAL training, everyone had a swim buddy. You were never allowed to go anywhere without him. It was a rule that sounded childish at first, but it held deep meaning. The buddy system meant you were accountable. It meant you were never isolated. It meant someone had your back and you had theirs. In life, too, no one succeeded alone. Behind every hero, there were mentors, teammates, families, and silent supporters. McRaven thought of his own mentors, commanders who pushed him harder, who refused to accept mediocrity, who demanded excellence not just in action, but in thought, and of his family, whose sacrifice, worry, and support gave him a reason to stay grounded. He often reminded himself and others that greatness wasn't about having all the answers. It was about asking better questions, about listening more, about admitting when you're wrong. In a world eager for loud opinions, humility was a rare and powerful force. It opened doors, it built bridges, it saved lives. There were also moments that tested belief, moments of loss. McRaven remembered walking behind the casket of a young SEAL killed in the line of duty. The silence of that march, the folded flag, the grieving family, it pierced through the noise of medals and protocols. That was the cost. That was the weight of command. And in those moments, words failed. Only action mattered. Live with honor. Carry their memory. Never waste the freedom bought at such a price. As he transitioned into civilian roles, he brought these principles with him. In universities, he emphasized courage in academia. In government, he preached accountability. In his writing, he distilled lessons not into theories, but into stories. Accessible, practical, and deeply human. One of his proudest moments came not on the battlefield, but when a mother wrote to him. Her son, once lost and unfocused, had read his book. The boy began waking early. He started exercising. He volunteered. He applied to college. The mother thanked McRaven not for saving her son's life, but for showing him that small changes could lead to transformation. That was the power of simple truths. Make your bed. Measure by inches, not miles. Lift others. Face your sharks. Be your very best in your darkest moments. Dare greatly. Never ring the bell. He had seen the bell. He had felt its call, but he had turned away from it. And in doing so, he built a life not free of failure, but full of meaning. The world, McRaven believed, could change, but only if people chose to do the hard things. If they chose right over easy. If they began each day with a task completed. That one win, no matter how small, could build momentum. A clean room, a made bed, a kind word, a job done well, a teammate helped. Each act added up. The world didn't need perfection. It needed consistency, compassion, and courage. When McRaven looked in the mirror each morning, he didn't look for greatness. He looked for alignment. Was he showing up as the man he had trained to be? Was he honoring the lessons written in sweat and salt water? If the answer was yes, then he made the bed. And so, in the quiet hours before the sun warmed the sky, when the city still slept and the world hadn't yet begun its noisy churn, a hand pulled a blanket tight, aligned a pillow, and smoothed out the sheets. The corners were crisp, the surface smooth, the job done right, the day ready to be faced. And that was enough to begin. Small steps, tough mornings, hard choices. That's how legacies are built. Make Your Bed isn't just a book, it's a way of life. Because success doesn't start when the world notices you. It starts when you hold yourself to a higher standard every single day. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect, don't just listen, act. And remember, greatness begins right at the edge of your bed. You've been listening to Thinknova, where powerful ideas come to life.